Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod, and this is Star Wars 7 by 7. So today we are talking about The Ride by John Jackson Miller. This is a full spoiler podcast, so if you have not read the story or listened to the audiobook version of the story and you don't want it spoiled for you, well then save this one for a later date. But if you're okay with me sharing the details with you in brief, so that way you can have a handle on the stuff happening in Canto Bight prior to the events of The Last Jedi, well, then by all means, let's get into it. The story revolves around Kaljach Sonmi, that's Jach, Kaljach Sonmi, and Cal, for short, is a proposition player. Now, I wonder if this is something that actually exists in casinos, because it's kind of a cool idea. Apparently, he is an employee of the casino in Canto Bight, and he's paid to make casino games. So if you need multiple players to be playing any particular card game or other game of chance, not just the house versus one player, but you need multiple players, well, when things are slow, like in the mornings and the afternoons, you get these proposition players coming in who are playing with their own money. They are paid a salary by the casino, but they're not necessarily given a stake by the casino. They're playing with their own money, and they supposedly, this is what they tell you, and based on the way the story goes, it sounds like it really is the case. It's not like the house is giving these proposition players any additional benefit or anything like that. Nope. If they lose their money, then they lose their money, and that's that. But in Cal's case, it wasn't enough, the salary that he's getting paid for doing the proposition player work at Canto Bight. Instead, he's actually gotten some funding from someone who turns out to be the accountant of Sturgana, that gangster that we heard about the other day. And that money, he's been working on a system for Zinbiddle, a card game, where he's hoping to get one of these incredible impossible hands called the Ion Barrage, and he actually manages to make it happen, but unfortunately, due to the intervention of this group of aliens called the Lucky Three, or known around the casino as the Lucky Three, somehow an Ion Barrage happens with them as well, and because of weird cruise ship rules, even though Cal gets an Ion Barrage, he can't actually keep the winnings, which he would have needed to get out of debt to this person who he later finds out, oh no, this is Sturgana who actually is the guy holding the chit on this, and he's given a warning that if he doesn't pay off this 800,000 credit debt by sunrise, then he is going to be gone. So his fortunes get hooked up almost literally, actually very literally, with these Lucky Three, Dodie and Wodie and Thody. Kind of reminds you of the dwarves from The Hobbit. And even though he's been working on a system to get this Zinbiddle thing to work, and it looks like the system is working because he was about to win this progressive jackpot, this huge thing, it turns out that this whole system that he's been working on, he has to kind of throw the idea of it out the window around these three, because somehow, and it's never explained, and maybe it's the Force, maybe it's something else entirely, because who knows, the universe works in mysterious ways, but depending on which of the three are involved, and whether it's one or two or three of them, the odds sort of change and things start to go either their way or against their way, and part of the story is Cal trying to figure out, oh, I see how the pattern is working here, and even though it goes against everything I believe about gambling and about systems and about odds and this sort of thing, I'm learning to run with this whole situation. And in the course of the evening, the Countess of Canto Bight is mentioned, and we also get to see Joris, who was a client of Lexo Sugar, the masseur from the other story that we talked about on Canto Bight, the See Nothing, Hear Nothing, Say Nothing story. And let's see who else. Oh, Kedpin Shocklop also shows up in this story as well. He was the schlub who was going to be used to deliver an explosive and have to be killed along with a corrupt Canto Bight police officer in the very first story in the Canto Bight series. He shows up at the end as well, and apparently he is enjoying himself post craziness that he went through. And fathier races actually end up playing a part in this too, which is something that Cal never does because there's absolutely no way to try to figure out the odds on a horse race in the same way that you can figure out what the odds are with a deck of cards, for example. And it occurred to me to look back, since fathier racing was very prominent in the other stories as well. This particular fathier race did not show up in the other stories, but it finally occurred to me that the fathier race that happens in See Nothing, Hear Nothing, Say Nothing is the same fathier race that happens in the original Kedpin Shoklop story. That would be Rules of the Game if you're keeping track at home. And I have to say I was pleasantly surprised by this story. I mean, it's not like I, didn't think John Jackson Miller had it in him necessarily. I mean, I have not read a lot of his work, and I had not read any of his previous novels that were part of the old expanded universe, now Legends. The only work of his that I'm familiar with in Star Wars land is A New Dawn. That would be the novel that was the first of the novels that came out rebooting the Star Wars. I know they don't call it the expanded universe, just I guess rebooting the fictional canon, and that featured the first meeting of Hera Syndulla and Kanan Jarrus, and it's sort of a prequel to the Star Wars Rebels TV series. Now, that had its moments of humor in it, to be sure, but I found this whole story of the ride to be much more humorous in total and much more lighthearted by comparison. And even though the circumstances are, kind of similar for everybody in these short stories, it was definitely a lot lighter in tone in the ride than it was for anyone else. I mean, it's the same kind of thing. If Lexo Sugar doesn't turn informant for Sturgana, then his daughter's going to die, and then chances are he's going to die too. With, this guy Cal, if he doesn't pay his debts by sunrise, he's going to die a horrible death. And if Kedpin, doesn't get out of the mess that he's in, he's going to die. And Anglang, the guy that ends up setting him up for it, if, once he gets Kedpin out of the whole thing and gets a conscience about it, now he has to deal with the fact that he is going to die as a result, because the Old City Boys are going to kill him because he didn't follow through on the contract that he was supposed to follow through on. And the Wine and Dreams, you have Ubiala, the nightclub and bar owner, who is threatened by Sturgana to say, if you don't get a bottle of that stuff, then we're going to have words. And, that's just a euphemism. And even, Durla, who is the wine merchant in this, she ends up being put in danger too. So all of these characters in these 4 short stories are put into very extreme do this or die circumstances. And I guess, you can't make the stakes any higher than that, really. But for all of them, they're, much more serious altogether, with the exception of the ride, which was definitely a lot more lighthearted in tone. And from a time frame standpoint, considering that Kedpin from the original story, Rules of the Game, he is supposed to be in Canto Bight for a 2-week vacation, and all expenses paid vacation for 2 weeks, thanks to being the Evaporator Sales being of the year. You have to imagine that all 4 of these short stories take place within a 2-week time span, so that, they're all, flying through each other's orbit and make sense in a way. And considering what we talked about yesterday, where you could imagine the possibility that the ending of the See Nothing, Hear Nothing, Say Nothing story takes place during the fathier chase in The Last Jedi, then we've got really, a set of stories that takes place immediately proximate to the events of The Last Jedi. Whether it has anything to do with the Solo A Star Wars story movie, and whether we're going to see any of the backstory of any of these characters in Solo as part of that, well, that's the really intriguing thing. And people are going to start finding out about that tomorrow, because as opposed to the movie actually having its world premiere at Cannes, which is what it was going to be, over at the French Film Festival on May 15th, now they're actually doing the world premiere in Los Angeles on May 10th. And so there's going to be a whole red carpet premiere and a live stream on StarWars.com, sponsored by Nissan and all that fun stuff. And we're at the point where it's going to be time to start being careful on social media about what you hear and what you see, because spoilers are going to start leaking out. Yeah, I know it's the press, and it's, people who ought not to disclose these things and who ought to be careful, but embargoes or not, it's going to start leaking out. So if you don't want Solo spoiled for you, then it's time to start being careful around social. And I will say, for our part here on the podcast that Safe Week is starting basically a week earlier than anticipated. It was going to be just, the week before, like it was with The Last Jedi, but now we are declaring Safe Week to begin on Friday the 11th, which is 2 weeks before the release of Solo, a Star Wars story. So you can be assured that you're not going to hear anything on the podcast that is going to spoil the movie for you. And in fact, if there's news about commercials being released, or new footage, or new trailers, teasers, new newspaper articles, whatever, we will talk about Solo stuff, but we are going to stop talking about new stuff and only analyze the stuff that we have available to us right now. So if you're game for that, then I'm your man. Stick with Star Wars 7x7. And that is going to do it for today's episode. And I'm doing Last Jedi trivia over on the audio version of the podcast. That's sw7x7.com/iTunes, or wherever you like to listen to podcasts. But for now, it just remains for me to say thank you so much for watching, and may the Force be with you wherever in the world you may be.